All right, hi guys, I'm back and I'm back today with a video analysis of Hurricane Katrina versus Hurricane Helene. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware that yesterday I made a post comparing Hurricane Katrina and comparing it with Hurricane Helene, and I got a lot of backlash from that post, and I got even accused of posting information that was false or not accurate or misleading. I stand by that post. It was accurate, and this video is going to explain all of that by looking at the differences between Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Helene. So first of all, I do want to say this. Hurricane Katrina is one of the deadliest and most costly natural disasters that the United States has ever seen. In fact, it is the deadliest hurricane to make landfall on the mainland of the United States. You'll notice on this chart, though, that it lists Hurricane Maria as the deadliest hurricane, killing nearly 3,000 people back in 2017. But notice that Hurricane Maria actually made landfall on Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So it did not actually make landfall on the mainland of the United States. So then you see number 2, which was Hurricane Katrina, which resulted in deaths in Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. And of course, that was back in 2005. And so by no means am I trying to say that Katrina was not a serious hurricane. Obviously it was. And again, it is the most deadly hurricane to hit the U.S. mainland. All right, now let's keep going though. All right, so let's talk about what makes a hurricane bad. So one of the things that meteorologists will look at is the pressure that is measured in the center of that hurricane. To get these pressure readings, they fly airplanes through there. They call them the hurricane hunters, and they fly right through these storms to get actual readings in the middle of the storm. So for a storm to be strong, the pressure has to be very low. So understand, on a normal day, our pressure hangs out around 1,000 millibars. Technically, the average is 1,013 millibars. So as the pressure starts dropping below 1,000, you're getting a lower and lower pressure. And hurricanes will have the lowest pressures on Earth. And so right here on this chart, you see the top 5 strongest Atlantic hurricanes by their pressures. And as you can see, number 1 was Hurricane Wilma, which was also in 2005, which may surprise some people because a lot of people have this idea that Katrina was like the worst hurricane that we've ever had. And as I've already said, as far as the number of deaths that it caused, you could make a strong argument for that. But meteorologically speaking, looking at the data from the storm itself, Katrina does not even make the top 5 top Atlantic hurricanes by pressure. And in fact, notice the top hurricane by pressure was Hurricane Wilma, which was also in 2005, the same year as Katrina. So in other words, Katrina was not even the worst hurricane in 2005. You can see I've added on this chart Katrina and Helene at the bottom, and you can see Katrina did have a very low pressure, especially considering that it was only a Category 3 at landfall. It had a very low pressure at 920 millibars. Helene, a week ago, had a pressure of 938 millibars. And so if we're just looking at the pressure, then you could say that Katrina was a stronger hurricane than Helene, but we need to look at more than just the pressure. One of the other things that we look at when we're trying to determine the strength of a hurricane would be the force of the winds. And so this graphic shows you the top Atlantic hurricanes by wind speed. And once again, notice that Katrina does not even make the top 5. In fact, you would have to go out to number 26 on this list before you would see Katrina. In other words, according to wind speeds at landfall, Katrina would be the 26th most powerful hurricane to make landfall in the United States. Also, I want you to notice you see Wilma up there again. And notice that even though Wilma had the lowest pressure, that did not translate into the strongest winds. And so there's not always a good correlation there. You could have a really low pressure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have the strong winds. And that's what happened with Wilma. Now, don't get me wrong here. Wilma was a Category 5 and was very strong. In fact, all these storms that you see listed here were Category 5 storms. And then to give you an idea of the wind speeds from Katrina and Helene, you see those listed at the bottom. Katrina, when it made landfall, had wind speeds that were clocked at around 125 miles an hour. Last week with Hurricane Helene, Helene had wind speeds of 140 miles per hour. All right, let's keep going. All right, so this map now shows the track of Hurricane Helene. On that post that I made yesterday, some people jumped on me because I said that Katrina was a Category 3 storm. Well, what they didn't understand was that I was trying to say that is what it was when it made landfall. Some people, I think, have this idea that once a hurricane reaches its maximum strength, it just stays there. Well, that just doesn't happen. And so you can see on this map, which goes from August 23rd out to August 31st, and you can see that path that Katrina took. So Katrina actually became a Category 1 hurricane. I believe it was around August 25th or 26th. And that's where the number 1 is that you see there. And so indicating it was a Category 1 hurricane. Then gradually over the next few days, Katrina moved very slowly. Again, look at the dates up there, taking 8 days to go from becoming a tropical storm all the way to making landfall in Louisiana. 8 days. So it moved very slowly, and it very gradually strengthened as it went into the Gulf of Mexico. So you can see where it became a Category 2, and then a Category 3, and then briefly it was a Category 4, and then it was a Category 5 as it was out over the center part of the Gulf of Mexico. But then as Katrina started approaching the coast, it started interacting with the land, and you get a lot of wind shear, and it's difficult for storms to hold together under those conditions. And so Katrina started to weaken. It was down to a 4, and then by the time it made landfall, Katrina was actually just a Category 3 storm. Now, let's talk about the size of the storm. Now, hurricanes can be various sizes. They can be quite large to quite small. When it comes to the size of hurricanes, Katrina was, I would say, a medium-sized storm. Looking at the cloud mass of Katrina, its cloud mass had a diameter of about 400 miles, and you can see that in the picture here. All right, now this is a map that is showing the wind gust analysis from when Katrina made landfall. And if you look at those numbers across the bottom, you have right here at Grand Isle, Louisiana, this is where the highest wind speeds were clocked. And at Grand Isle, Louisiana, the highest wind speeds at landfall were clocked at 120 miles per hour. Now, if we take that and look at our hurricane category scale, you see that right here. So at 120 miles an hour, that put Hurricane Katrina right in the middle of the wind speeds for a Category 3 storm. Now understand that does make it a major storm. A 3 or a 4 or a 5 is considered to be major. And with a Category 3 storm, you do expect devastating damage from that storm. And certainly that is what we saw from the Category 3 Katrina when it made landfall. Now, let's also talk about Katrina's storm surge. This is where Katrina really packed a punch. The storm surge for Katrina was huge. We don't often see storm surges go over 10 to 15 feet. But you can see that with Katrina, there were actually areas up here along the Mississippi coastline where the storm surge got over 30 feet. That is just incredible. That means a storm surge of 30 feet, you have a three-story building could be underwater with that. And so that was an incredible storm surge. But notice that the storm surges down in Louisiana were really not all that impressive. The big problem, of course, is, as you all know, down around New Orleans, is that New Orleans actually sits below sea level, and they use these levees to try to keep the water out. And the pumps on those levees failed, and that was what led to the devastating flooding there in New Orleans. All right, let's keep going. All right, let's talk about rainfall. So this shows the observed precipitation that was associated with Hurricane Katrina. And you can see down around Louisiana, the New Orleans area, we certainly had areas that were getting 8 to 10 inches, even 10 to 12 inches, and a very small area there that, say, got between 12 and 17 inches. I think the highest reports of rainfall with Katrina were actually right around 15 inches. Now, 15 inches is a lot of rain, and certainly that contributed to the flooding that they saw there in Louisiana and Mississippi that was associated with Hurricane Katrina. Right, let's keep going. All right, now let's start talking about Helene. So this map shows the track that Helene took just about a week ago. In fact, it was a week ago today that Helene was just about to make landfall in Florida. So you can see Helene actually started as a low pressure system down here by Central America, and then it meandered up through the Caribbean, and once it was close to the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, that's where Helene first became a hurricane at a Category 1. Helene moved very quickly. It tracked right up through the Gulf, moving very quickly, moving much faster than Katrina did. Remember, it took Katrina over a week to make landfall once it had become a hurricane. But Helene moved very quickly, and it also rapidly intensified. And so we have it at a Category 1, then a few hours later at a Category 2, a few hours later at a Category 3, and a few hours later at a Category 4, which is the level that it was at when it hit Florida a week ago. Now let's talk about the size of Helene. Helene was immense. This measurement shows Helene being 822 miles. Now, I know some of you are going to look at that and say, well, wait a minute, that wasn't all Helene. There was a cold front there that was causing a lot of these clouds and storms, and Helene merged with that. And that is true. But what you've got to understand is that once Helene merged with that cold front, that essentially became one entity. So the cold front and Helene, the hurricane, are now one thing. You can't look at that map and tell where the hurricane starts and where the cold front starts. They have merged together into one weather system. And so because of that, Helene became immense. It became immense, and it became very strong, much larger than Hurricane Katrina, which, remember, was only 400 miles across. And remember, we got rain up here in the Ohio Valley from this. This was just a huge storm. All right, let's keep going. All right, so now zooming into Florida at the time of landfall, this is showing what Helene looked like at landfall. And notice when Helene made landfall just west-southwest of Perry, Florida, the measured winds were clocked at 140 miles an hour, which made Helene a Category 4 storm. Remember, with Katrina, the winds were only 125 miles an hour, which is why Katrina was only a Category 3 when it made landfall. And again, this is just reminding you of that. You can look here with Helene. We had winds of 140 miles an hour, which puts that right in the middle of the range for a catastrophic Category 4 storm. Now, what about the wind surge for Helene? Helene had some pretty impressive wind surge as well. Up here in the Big Bend area of Florida, that's where the wind surges were the worst. They were predicted at 10 to 20 feet. They're still assessing this at this time, but I do know that they have said that they've confirmed storm surges along the Big Bend of Florida that were at least at 15 feet. Now, again, that is definitely considerably less than what they saw in Mississippi after Katrina. And so Katrina did have a bigger storm surge than Helene. Now, what about the rainfall? This map shows the rainfall that was associated with Hurricane Helene from the day it made landfall on September 26th to 2 days later. One thing you've got to understand with this map, though, is Helene was a slow mover. And so this only shows 2 days. The rain continued for at least 2 more days for many of these locations. But even looking at this map, which only shows the first 2 days, you can see that we already are showing locations that were above a foot of rain. And we now know, of course, that this area right along the Tennessee North Carolina border, we now know that there are locations there that have received over 30 inches of rain, some reports possibly saying as much as 40 inches of rain. And look at this huge area that got rain from Helene. This is much bigger than the area that got rain from Katrina, and the rain amounts are much higher, which is why the flooding has just been so devastating from Helene and over a much wider area than what we saw with Katrina. Here. If we can look at Katrina versus Helene by the numbers, you can see the pressure there for Katrina was 920 millibars. For Helene, 938. The little plus sign here is showing which one wins. So Katrina wins with a much lower pressure. Looking at the wind speeds, Katrina was at 125, whereas Helene's at 140. So Helene wins with the winds. Looking at the category of the storm, Katrina was a Category 3. Helene, though, wins being a Category 4. Looking at the size of the storm, Katrina was 400 miles across, whereas Helene was over 800 miles across, so Helene wins there. Looking at the storm surge, the max storm surge for Katrina was about 33 feet, whereas for Helene, possibly as high as 20 feet, but either way, that means that Katrina wins there. Looking at the rainfall, the maximum rainfall from Katrina was 15 inches, but from Helene, we're looking at 30 plus inches. So with a higher wind speed, with a larger size, and with more rainfall, Helene beats Katrina by the numbers as a larger and a more powerful storm than what we saw with Hurricane Katrina. So I would encourage you to share this video with your friends. I want to get this information out there. Thank you for watching the video.